Real quick, before we get into the show, I wanted to share a new service called Getita that Ken and I have been using that has made us over $10,000 in Amazon reimbursements. The service requires no monthly subscription, and Getita collects a small percentage of the money they recover for you. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up and works on all Amazon marketplaces. Go to Getita.com, Getida, and enter promo code FTM400. That's FTM for Firing the Man 400 to get your first $400 in reimbursements commission free. How much money does Amazon owe you?
Always take everything with a little bit of grain of salt. But what I really have come to believe is that the less moving of currency, the better. And how some people live a life where they will never taste victory because they're too afraid of the potential defeat.
Welcome everyone to the Firing the Man podcast, a show for anyone who wants to be their own boss. If you sit in a cubicle every day and know you are capable of more, then join us. This show will help you build a business and grow your passive income streams in just a few short hours per day. And now your hosts, serial entrepreneurs David Schomer and Ken Wilson.
Welcome, everyone, to the Firing the Man podcast. On today's episode, we are talking all things international expansion with Kevin Sanderson. Kevin is the founder of Maximizing E-commerce, where he helps successful 6, 7, and 8-figure Amazon sellers expand their e-commerce sales internationally. Kevin is also part of an elite club of two-time guests of the Firing the Man podcast. For those of you wanting to know more about Kevin's story, we encourage you to check out episode 41, where he details his Firing the Man story of leaving a cushy corporate job to pursue a life of entrepreneurship in the e-commerce space. Kevin, welcome back.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be in this exclusive club of the two-timers. So that's super exciting that I'm now here. And so now I can officially say it, because until you said it and we hit the record button, it was just more of an idea that I one day might be in.
That's right. Well, Ken, we need to get this man a t-shirt or a gold watch or something like that.
I know. Got to send him some swag.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Well, good stuff. So, Kevin, for those of you who did not tune into episode 41, can you give a little bit of background on who you are and your path to starting Maximizing E-commerce?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was working for the man and had been climbing the corporate ladder for a while. Ended up working in more kind of small business at a friend of mine's insurance agency, which is going through rocket ship growth. And it was one of those things where I was like, I need to do something for myself, and stumbled on Scott Volker's podcast, which at the time was all about getting started selling on Amazon. And I started selling in 2015 with retail arbitrage, basically going to Walgreens, Walmart, Goodwill, whatever, and finding stuff to buy and flip on Amazon. Quickly learned that was not for me. There's a lot of scanning for stuff that is just never going to sell on Amazon, or the margins don't work and stuff like that. So for people that have figured out retail arbitrage, God bless them, because I have not. But it did get me my first initial sales and kind of click the switch in my mind of like, wait, there's people actually will buy stuff that I'm selling. That's not just like something people talk about in these podcasts. So I decided to take a season's worth of earnings as a high school football official. So at the time I was a football official. So doing like Friday Night Lights type of thing, chasing kids around with a yellow flag and blowing a whistle. And I took a season's worth of earnings. Yes, we did make a little bit of money. It wasn't huge, but enough to put down towards my first product, and then reinvested as I could. And 3 years later, I fired the man. And along the way, people were asking me like, okay, how do you do this? And so I just started basically answering the questions that people were having. And then as time went on, I was always looking for ways to grow. And really in e-commerce, I think it's pretty simple. You've got products to sell, people to sell to. It's harder than we think it is to just launch new products, and especially expecting some of them to be successful, because it's very cash intensive. And it's not as easy as it sounds. Like, oh yeah, you just take what you're selling on Amazon and put it on Walmart and put it on Etsy and put it on eBay and all this other stuff. And so I was finding, I got to find more people to buy the things I'm trying to sell. And I was finding like, oh, wait, there's people in Canada, there's people in the UK, there's people in other places that are doing what I'm doing, or that are buying things like what I'm selling, I should say. And so why not just offer that to sale or for sale in those countries? And so people started asking me a lot of questions about that. And I was been helping people with international expansion, as well as having been in an events and training background in my corporate life, as well as at the insurance agency. And so I've also been putting on educational events the last couple of years, which
Awesome.
I can think of 2 speakers that have been at these events too.
So can I.
Absolutely.
So can I.
Yes.
So Kevin, you're well known for 2 things in the space. One is helping people sell internationally on Amazon, which we're going to dive into here in a little bit. The other thing that you're known for in the space is, and that you're an expert in, is hosting events. I would say live events, but I think taped just events, hosting events. And so before we get into kind of the international expansion piece, can you maybe speak to the events that you host and how can sellers access those to learn more?
Yeah. So basically with events, you and I met first, Ken, at an event that I had put on with Scott Volker. So Scott Volker, I listened to his podcast and eventually actually got to know him and be friends with him. He's a really good guy. And he had, before I had left the job, he and I had, what's the word I'm looking for? He and I had chatted one time at an event, Seller Summit, which is a great event hosted by Steve Chu and Tony Anderson. And we were talking one night and he was saying, because at the time he was very well known for how he started selling on Amazon. And I think he was trying to get beyond how he started selling on Amazon. And at the time, his goal was to like help people more in the intermediate to advanced stage. At least I'm paraphrasing what I understood, which probably was influenced by a couple of beers. So I probably have what he was telling me off by a little bit. But what I did take away with is, you know what, he might benefit from doing a live event. And having had, in the hotel world, experience doing live events, I reached out to him after we, all went home after Seller Summit. And I was like, hey, you should do an event. I think it'd be beneficial for you. I thought he was going to say, yeah, we've thought about that. But, it just kindly let me down. So I was expecting to be told, thanks, but no thanks. But instead, he was like, well, how would that work? And so we started talking about it, whatnot. And so we ended up hosting a live event in 2019 called Brain Accelerator Live, which Ken was at. And we were going to do it again in 2020, but we all know what happened in 2020, the thing that went around. But we never know what algorithms are listening. So to your benefit, I will not say the word of the thing, but we all know what it was. And so basically, I really wanted to do another event, but at the time, it made absolutely no sense, to do something in person or just try to plan something in person. No one knew like were in-person events ever come back, which they have now at this point. But I decided, okay, I've got some relationships I've built in the space. I kind of heard about this virtual summit model. So I started doing some virtual summits because I was looking for something to, to do, so to speak, because we're all trying to figure out life with the thing that was floating around the world in 2020. And since then, I've actually put on 11 summits, bringing together a variety of speakers to help sellers level up on topics like PPC, conversion rate optimization, international expansion, building, brand building, et cetera, et cetera. So try to bring in topics that I think will help people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And on those topics, you had mentioned international expansion, which you're known as a legend in the industry for this topic. And
how much do I owe you for saying that?
Legend. That's at least $100 there.
I know. Yeah. Okay. I'll send it. I'll PayPal it.
So anyway, a little bit of backstory on this. Ken and I had a conversation about 2 years ago, and we basically was, how do we grow these businesses? And we said, well, we can either launch new products and those might work or they may not, or we can take our existing products into new marketplaces. And the nice thing with Amazon is your reviews come with you. And so, it seems to me that you really have your finger on the pulse of these various international markets. And if somebody is thinking about this type of expansion, what exercise would they go through to identify this, the UK, that's my best next step, or Germany or Canada. How do people pick what market to go into?
That's a good question, because the number of markets you could go into has rapidly expanded over the last 3 years. And one of the things I would tell people is, what besides the US, so for most of the people, they're looking at, okay, I'm in the US now, whether I live in the US or I live somewhere else and I sell in the US and I'm trying to go to another marketplace. So just assuming we're going beyond the US border, the best thing to think about is, okay, what is going to give me the best results for return of time and effort put into it? And remember, not every marketplace is the same. So there's a variety of things you got to think about. Like, there's generally some level of paperwork or registration for almost all countries you go into. There is potentially other languages that people are speaking in. There's other currencies in all marketplaces, because none of them are selling in US dollars outside of the US. And so you got to think about, like, okay, also, what is going to give me the best results potentially? And so one of the things I tell people to be careful of is, well, anytime Amazon calls, pick up the phone, answer, but because you probably learned something, even if you know more than the person you're talking to, you get at least a little finger on the pulse of what's happening in Seattle, even if that person's not in Seattle, but you'll understand more of what's going on at Amazon. But oftentimes what will happen is you'll get emails every day. Hey, go to Singapore, go to Saudi Arabia, go wherever else. The problem for Amazon oftentimes is they have a chicken and egg problem when they start a new marketplace in a new country. You got to have products to attract customers. And in order to attract more sellers to sell products, you got to have more customers. So it's a flywheel effect that has not started flying. And so what ends up happening is sometimes people will email me like, oh, I looked into it, and if I go to one of these newer marketplaces, I could dominate there. I'm like, you might, but the pie might be so small, you might get a sale a month. And so maybe you'll have the best BSR ever, but you can't take BSRs to Bank of America. You can take dollars, or transfer from one currency into dollars, I should say. So then what you want to look at, like, okay, where am I going to get the best possible results? And for most sellers, it tends to be Canada and the UK. I know some people say, oh, but Germany is a bigger marketplace, or Japan's bigger. Their cultures are a lot different. If you're in the US, or at least selling in the US, Canada and the UK at least are all based off of English common law, at least how the countries work. The language in Canada is almost identical to the US. And yes, they all speak English, but there's a little more localization you might have to do in the UK potentially, because just sometimes, people spell things a little differently. But for the most part, it's all pretty similar. And so for the amount of work you put into it and the results you'll probably get out of it, Canada and UK are generally people's best bet. And if you're going to do one first, I would recommend to most people do Canada first, because it's generally easier for more people, because the way like the government works and the language and everything, it's just easier. And the logistics, I mean, it's just up north. For some sellers, it'd be faster to send stuff to, Brampton, Ontario, or to British Columbia than it would be to send it to Texas.
Absolutely. And I want to cover, I wanted to cover real quickly, but just out of transparency. So everybody listening, so David and I, we hired Kevin to expand our portfolio of companies into international marketplaces probably 18 months ago, a couple years ago.
Sounds about right.
So, yeah. And so that was wildly successful. Kevin and his team were able to essentially hold our hand and essentially just guide us through the process and take care of all the heavy lifting, all the weird questions, all the stuff that we didn't understand. It was I would kind of call it like, if you've ever been to like Disney World or somewhere like that, where you get the rapid pass, you get to go to the front of the line. That was kind of what we did. We hired Kevin and his team. They took us to the front of the line and said, here you go, boom. And we're in selling. And so just wanted to cover that with full transparency. And they did an amazing job. That's why Kevin's on the show, as well as he's a really cool guy. So that out of the way. So we've been selling in Canada, UK and Germany we've been ramping up over the last, I would say, 12 months or so. Different marketplaces took different time to get into based on illegal issues, kinds of different stuff that, Kevin and his team took care of for us. So just wanted to kind of point out, like David alluded to a little bit earlier, as we were deciding like how to expand our businesses, we can launch new products or we can expand into different sales channels, marketplaces. And a couple of the reasons why we chose Canada, while we chose to go into international marketplaces, was the reviews followed, as well as you already have the same products, the same vendors, and that you're essentially just like placing new orders with that. Now, so Kevin, and also David, over to you for like a little bit of like, just to give the audience some numbers, like for our .com portfolio companies, Canada's doing like 10, 15, 20% of .com. Like, can you share a little bit of the numbers with the audience so they...
Yeah, absolutely. So when compared to our .com, or if we're looking at a pie chart of our total sales, Canada is making up about 10%. I think it will be approaching 15 to 20 as we get all of our SKUs stocked.
And that's of total sales?
That is of total sales.
Oh, wow.
I love Canada. I'm a huge fan of Canada. I like the exchange rates. You can price a little bit higher. I'm a big fan of Canada. The UK currently probably makes up 2 to 3% of our total sales.
Oh, okay.
And
hopefully
so
that comes up soon.
That is partially a function of we stocked our bestsellers first and are working on getting our catalogs in. We were hoping to do it by Q4, but Amazon hit us with inventory restrictions. Shame on them.
Wasn't nice.
And Germany has less than 1%. Some issues getting stuff into the country. We were booking all of our own shipments and trying to deal with the duties and taxes and stuff on our own. And so I would say that I don't think we've seen the full potential of that market yet because we really have a fraction of our SKUs. And so, that's just kind of set the scene. And for comparison, Walmart's probably like 3 to 5%. Mm-hmm. We were honestly thinking Walmart was going to be bigger because it's everywhere in the US. And it outperforms eBay and Etsy, but I'm a lot happier with UK and Canada than I am with Walmart. So.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. And, if you're looking at it from a pie chart and it's 10% of the total pie chart and you have other pieces of the pie, by my very rough math, it's probably for every let's say $1,000 you're making in sales in the US, you're probably making 150-ish in Canada.
Yeah.
So it's about a 15% bump. Yeah. So if, you're getting a 4-ish% bump for Walmart, that's not uncommon from what a lot of people have, is that I literally I've said this publicly so many times. I've had one person, it might be two, I might be forgetting someone. Let's just say two. 1 or 2 people have challenged me and said, my sales on Walmart are better than my sales in Canada on Amazon. So their Walmart US sales versus their Amazon Canada sales, almost without fail, Amazon Canada is better.
Yeah.
For most people.
Yeah, I think that's a better move because you can turn on North American remote fulfillment and kind of test the waters first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if that works, then you can send inventory up there. We had inventory sitting at a 3PL. And so it was, like I said, I'm a big fan of Canada over the past couple of months. So
it's definitely one of the most, I think, underrated marketplaces. I think sometimes there's this thought people have of like, but I have to go across an ocean. I need to go to the UK or Australia is going to be better because like there's been buzz about Australia the last couple of years. And I'm like, it's just newer than Canada because like Canada's been around longer for Amazon than Australia has. For most people, the bang for their buck, Canada is going to be the best bet, especially to first start and get your feet wet internationally.
I have a working theory on why that may be. And
Why is that?
I think it's largely ego driven. I feel like a badass when I tell people that I sell in the UK and Germany and Canada's just up north, but doing business in the UK and Germany, this guy knows what he's talking about. It's an ego thing. And I catch myself and when people say, what do you do for a living? I say, I have physical products. We sell globally. We sell in the UK, Germany, US. And I think that's a piece of it. I think there's probably other reasons, but if you're making a pie chart of reasons, that is in the pie chart.
It does sound cooler to say like, oh yeah, I'm selling in Europe, Australia, and all this other stuff because it sounds farther away. Whereas like Canada, sometimes people look at it as like, isn't that just like the 51st state? No offense to anyone from Canada listening. We know you're a sovereign nation, completely different laws and a sovereign border. We respect that. But Canadians are super nice people, so they probably
absolutely. So I guess spin off that one. So Canada is an awesome marketplace. It's performing very well for us. And kind of to circle back to the point of that long spiel was, Kevin, in your opinion, so we had on the podcast previously, Tyler Jeffcoat, and we really dug deep into like profitability and then what the next 12 to 18 months is going to look like for e-commerce sellers as the economy's kind of cooling. Amazon FBA fees are increasing, the margins are decreasing. And so as the e-commerce sellers are looking to reinvest or invest into their businesses, new products is one, like David mentioned earlier, expanding into international marketplaces. And so in your opinion, expanding internationally, have you seen it from a lot of your clients, like coming back and saying, hey, this has really helped our business? Or, would you recommend putting money into new product launches? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah. So great question. Generally, most people that go international, they say they were pleasantly surprised with Canada, and either Canada or the UK are their top one. And I generally, if you're going to go into mainland Europe, and it was kind of along the lines of your question, but hopefully this is helpful here, is don't do everything. There's a lot of people, many of whom I truly respect, that will say, you want to register everywhere. I'm like, you could always register more later, and you can make it more complicated in Europe, but start simple and make it more complicated as the business dictates, not because, you got a free year from Amazon or something like that, because there's going to be more work than you realize. But going into next year, I've kind of bet the farm on this. And so it looks like people watching a video, it looks like I'm in my bedroom, but I'm actually in my office. And right over there is the door to the warehouse. And I have, invested in ways of kind of managing more of the process. And so I've got, machinery that I've purchased to do some of the process that would have been done by a factory. So I can better manage my inventory, because I started noticing the way I was packaging some things, the fulfillment fees were going up. So I ended up buying a shrink wrap machine. So hopefully that's not tested yet, but it still also opens the door to test out other products. And what I think a lot of people are going to have to start looking at is more long tail products, and not just going after, sexy products that sell, whatever home run product is for some people. Then start looking into a wider catalog than, having just, 2 or 3 products, the dream that people have. They're going to sit on a lot with a laptop on the beach. I think it's harder than it sounds. Is that I think you got to find ways to launch new products. And sometimes it might be a little unorthodox, I guess maybe is the way I'm looking at it. And one example I'll give that I have in front of me is there's 2 signs on my desk, and they're ones I bought at Disney World on vacation, but basically the same sign holder, basically, with just a different message inside of it. And so if you think kind of along those lines of like, okay, I can buy the signs and then I can just keep testing out new messages. I don't sell signs, but that's kind of an example of, I think, things people could be doing differently. Or, I have this Tumblr that says best dad ever, because, my kids have told me that I am. If you have, ways of testing messages on whether it be a Tumblr or something like that, I think that could be beneficial for a lot of people. Is that they got to start looking at new ways to test out products, maybe that are different than how they've done it before. That's my 2 cents.
I would definitely agree with you. I think that, especially on the customization piece, that's a barrier to entry that, you're not going to have a lot of Chinese competition, especially on anything custom. I think the days of sourcing 1,000 spatulas and turning a huge profit on that is gone. There was a time when you could do that. Right. It's over. And so, yeah. Sorry to interrupt the episode. You may have heard Ken and I talking recently about a new tool that we're using for Amazon refunds. Now, I have used other refund tools like this. However, I can tell you in the first 7 days, they scrubbed the back end of my Amazon account going back 18 months and found $5,000 of refunds. And the nice thing about this is it's my money. Amazon made a mistake and they are just auditing my account. The other thing I really like about this tool is there is no monthly fee. They only charge a commission if they are successful in getting you your money. Go to getida.com, Getida, and enter promo code FTM for Firing the Man, FTM 400. This is an awesome tool. Can't say enough good things about it. Now, back to the episode. So, Kevin, one of the things that you had mentioned was the complications. Like, don't register for all these marketplaces. They can get really complicated. And one thing that we're finding on the backside of international expansion is there's some compliance in terms of VAT and GST. And so can we talk about, let's just set the stage on what is VAT and what is GST? And what markets do they apply to?
Absolutely. So everything we're saying here, the disclaimer is I'm not a tax preparer in any of these countries. I just have been doing it for a while. So these are all my personal opinions from having done this in my own business and helped other people figure this out. So make sure to talk to the appropriate tax professional for anyone listening. But what could help you as you're talking to the appropriate tax professionals, understand the definitions and how things work. And so GST in Canada is the goods and services tax, and it's the harmonized sales tax. So GST, HST, which is like they have a tax at the federal level that most provinces have. And the way it's written in the books is that if you have at least 30,000 Canadian dollars of sales, which let's call that 23,000 US dollars in sales worldwide, that doesn't just have to be in Canada. So it's theoretically, if you've sold in a year, more than $22,000 in the US, chances are you should be registering for a GST number. And then with that, you're not just registering for a GST number, you'd also register for a business number, which is like their version of an EIN number. And then you'd also register for import-export. And so there's 3 numbers, but they're all tied to the same 9-digit business number. And then you have the 2 different accounts, one that gets stuff across the border and one for charging sales tax. And then Amazon will charge the customer on top of the selling price for the GST, and then they will give that to you. So if they're collecting it, they're giving it to you, and then you will owe that at the end of the year, but not the full amount. So GST operates kind of like value-added tax. So to take a step back, value-added tax, we'll say, is a cousin of GST. And with both of them, they're different than sales taxes in the US. The sales tax in the US, theoretically, is the end consumer is paying the sales tax, and that's when the government gets paid. And so if you think about it, in a lot of transactions, people are, buying raw materials to, in a factory to prepare something, and then that's being sold to a distributor or to a wholesaler or whatever the case is. So there's, multiple levels up the value chain, or, somebody adds a component to something. And so all this way up the chain in the US, not until the end results. Like, think about, you buy a car, how many pieces go into the car and how many suppliers there are, and suppliers of suppliers and suppliers of suppliers to get to that end car. And that's where the sales tax is charged. In GST countries and value-added tax countries, everyone's being charged GST or VAT or whatever, but they're also taking credits for it. So the government gets the same amount of money at the end of the day, but they're just getting it sooner. So it's a series of, as it goes up the chain, people are charging the GST, but then they're taking a credit on what they're going to owe based on what they've already paid back behind them in the value ladder, so to speak. it's very convoluted, especially to people in the US that aren't used to that. So when you are in Canada, your GST you would owe at the end of the year, because there it's a annual filing for most people. You would take what you've collected minus credits, and credits could be for things like if you're charged GST at the border, which you generally would be because you're now bringing it into the bubble. So you didn't pay Canadian government for, what you bought from your factory in China, or what, bought from a wholesaler in the US, or however you acquired your products. So once you get it across the border, now it's going into Canada. So now it's part of their system. So now GST is charged on it. But that GST that you pay is going to be subtracted out from what you owe at the end of the year, as well as you're going to be charged GST in most cases on top of your fulfillment fees and PPC charges. So all those, keep good documentation of it, and then you can take that as a credit. And it's fairly simple to file for Canadian GST at the end of the year. Then with value-added tax in the UK, for most people, it's going to end up being a quarterly filing. And where a lot of people are going to get kind of hung up is Amazon gives the value-added tax that you collect to the government for you, but you still have to register. So it gets very convoluted. Do not try to do value-added tax by yourself. Hire someone to do the filings for you. GST, if you're comfortable with it, there's a lot of sellers who do it on their own once they get the hang of it.
For the UK VAT, so Amazon's collecting that as a portion of their sale. They're giving it to the government. When you file, is it an informational return, or can you get money back, or how does that work?
You can. So using the same example of, let's take a step back. So with value-added tax, it's included in the selling price. So the way things work in Europe is not like they are in North America. So in Canada and the US, you add to cart, you go check out. Oh, by the way, we're going to add this on top for taxes. In Europe, if it says it's 24 pounds, I'm going to use this for simple math, which will make sense in a second. If they say it's 24 pounds, you check out, it's 24 pounds. Like there's no taxes added. What's happening is it's just included in the selling price. And so there's a 20% VAT in the UK. So if whatever the price is, theoretically, they're adding on 20%, and that's what's advertised to the customer. In practice, you say, this is my advertised price to Amazon. That's just the price they put. So just everyone make sure when you're pricing your products that you're factoring in that the way the math is going to work on the back end is 1/6 of your selling price will be value-added tax. So in my example of 24 pounds, 24 divided by 6 is 4. So right off the bat, 4 pounds is going straight to the government, and you're not even going to see it. But when you import it into the country, again, you're bringing goods into the bubble, haven't had any value-added taxes paid for on it yet. You're going to pay 20%. Now, what's kind of crazy is when you do the return, it would be somewhat informational if you didn't have credits, but you could get your credits back. If you were importing into the country with your VAT number, then you would get credit for, what's the word I'm looking for? You get credit for the VAT you paid at the border, and you could have them cut you a check when you go file, which you think it's not going to be quick. And they'll get around to cutting you the check when they cut the check. And then for whatever reason, to get from here to there, across the pond, is about 2 months. I have with letters and correspondence I've gotten for the UK government. Usually was sent about 2 months earlier. It's not fast at all. And then if you take a check, you can take that check to, let's say, your bank. And I can promise you, you're probably one of the first they can take it in the US, most banks can. But, oftentimes the manager might have to call someone like, how do I do this? Because they just don't know how to deposit a foreign check. So that's a little bit of a hassle. But there's also what's called, which is a relatively new thing, a deferred scheme where you could import into the country and you're deferring the payment of that until you file. So you owe it when you file, but you'd also get a credit at the same time. So it essentially cancels itself out. I have not personally done this in practice, but I recently asked for my account to be set up that way with the British government. So we can maybe talk about later on if that worked.
Cool.
So I know we just went really deep into the weeds on T and VAT. And so let's take a step back here.
Hopefully we didn't lose everybody because I bored them to tears on it.
Yeah. So Kevin, what would you say to someone that's afraid of expanding internationally because they're, concerned with complexities or staying compliant? What is your advice to them?
Yeah. My advice to them is at the end of the day, if other people have done it, they can too. I mean, it's not, the barrier to entry is not that hard. And the nice thing is it does scare away a lot of other sellers. And so you guys would never know that 10, 15% of your US sales, you're also going to get in Canada if you didn't try it. And the interesting thing is 10 to 15, sometimes 20% of sales that people get in the US, they get in Canada doesn't quite make sense. Well, 10% makes sense because the Canadian population is about 10, 12% of the US population. So you're getting a disproportionate amount of sales, and that's usually because there's less competition. PPC is usually less expensive because there's less competition. So don't let the fact that you have to fill out a couple of forms scare you from going into another country. And if it's some of the more complex countries like Europe, there's services that can help you.
I like that answer. And yeah, it's, as we're heading into lean times, barriers to entry are good things to go for. It isolates you from more competition, like you said, Kevin. So awesome. David, over to you.
Yeah, Kevin, any pro tips on dealing in multiple currencies? I've heard, when you click on Amazon and you see your payment, it's dispersed to you, say in the UK, it's dispersed as British pounds, but then it shows up in your account as US dollars. And so any tips on dealing with translation fees or being as efficient as possible there?
Yeah, great question. So what ends up happening is anytime currency moves from one to the other, there's a little bit of loss. And so if you go on Google and you just look up, USD to CAD or whatever currency movement you're doing, you're going to see what's called the mid-market rate. And the mid-market rate is basically what banks charge each other for moving currencies. You're always going to lose something. And one of the crazy things is I can tell you almost every company that does currency conversions will tell you a rate. When you ask them to validate it, they never really are great at it. So always take everything with a little bit of grain of salt. But what I really have come to believe is that the less moving of currency, the better. And so, for example, if you make a sale in Canada, you're going to be charged, let's say 15% fee. That's all in Canadian dollars. So, the customer bought something in Canadian dollars, fees are in Canadian dollars, FBA fees in Canadian dollars, referral fees in Canadian dollars, your inventory fees in Canadian dollars. Any fees Amazon's charging you in that country are in Canadian dollars. You could have PPC charges charged to your credit card, but I generally tend to tell most people just have it come out of your disbursement. Because what will end up happening is, let's say you have Amazon send everything straight to your bank, Bank of America, Chase, or whatever in the US, and you're going to lose a little bit in that transaction. Let's say it's around 1%. Let's just say the industry standard is around 1%. Amazon used to be less competitive than the others, but they've gotten to be competitive. But the challenge is when Amazon makes the disbursement, there's no waiting. There's no in between, pay it somewhere else. They just give it to you. And so if you have Amazon give you the money and you now have to pay off your PPC charges, what's going to happen is your credit card, your US dollar credit card is going to charge you it's not an itemized fee. It's just baked into a less favorable rate of conversions. And then when you receive your money, you paid something in there. So let's say it's 1% twice that you were charged, whereas you could have just had it come out of your disbursement, which is no charges for loss of conversion. So it's generally a good idea, I think, to put money into whether it's Payoneer, Ping Pong, there's a whole bunch of them. They're all pretty commoditized. And so what you could do is a lot of them allow you to pay other companies. So for example, a vast accounting that I have do my filings for VAT, I just pay them British pounds for my British pound account, because Amazon will take, instead of converting it to US dollars, they just take, oh, you have British pounds, you have a British pound account with Payoneer. They just put it in my Payoneer British pound account. Then when I'm ready to pay the British government, if I owe it, even though Amazon takes care of all the transactions, the math, and no one can explain in a way that makes sense to me. If I was to explain it to a second grader, it never makes sense, but you always owe something. So that's something I owe there. The prep center in the UK, I pay them out of that. So that way I'm not going back and forth between currencies. So I think it is beneficial to use a company like Payoneer to receive your conversions.
Would you ever pay a Chinese supplier? And I know you would be switching currencies once. You get paid in Canadian dollars, and then and instead of converting that to US dollars and then over to the Chinese currency, I don't know. What do you think about that?
So there was a time I was hearing a lot of people talk about like, oh yeah, you want to pay your supplier in RMB. I seem to find lately, and maybe it's just me with my suppliers, but they seem to really want US dollars. Like the dollar, right? As much as we talk about inflation, it's inflating worse in other countries. And so I think the dollar isn't, like, in other countries, like your suppliers, I think they want US dollars. And so I guess wouldn't hurt to ask, like, if you have the ability to switch your US dollars to RMB and then see if you can get it, which I think ping pong payments allows you to do that, pay your supplier in RMB, but I don't know that the benefit is necessarily there for a lot of people.
Okay. Sounds good. Over to
Cool.
you, Ken.
Yeah. So a couple more questions. I know we're coming up on time and we could chat for a long time, but so a quick one. So if someone was looking to expand internationally and they're like, oh, wow, I don't speak, if you're going to go into Canada, I think it's, a lot of it's French, maybe English. What if you're in Germany, or what if you're in Japan? Like how does the listings go if, like, you don't speak the native language, you can't translate that, you can't fix your listings? How does that work?
So in Canada, you're putting English. Amazon.ca is essentially an English speaking website that they can click a button to say they want it in Canadian, but it's no different than it's in Canadian. They want it in French, excuse me, which you could do. I think you could do that on Amazon.com too. Like, you can say what language you want it to, and that is 100% machine translation. So it's no different than, like, you could go on pretty much any website and say you want it German or whatever, and it's just going to translate it for you. If you go to a German website, you could have it, Chrome translate. It's the same kind of thing. So the folks in Quebec are really just seeing machine translation. They're not seeing native translations. Now, if you go into a country like Germany, where the marketplace is primarily German speakers, Amazon will do the translation for you, but it's 100% machine translation. And so is it necessarily great? It could be worth at least starting with machine translations. You can hire companies to do translating, but the thing about translation is kind of an interesting topic. I think it's better to start and see if it's worthwhile paying a company to translate it, because the way I look at it is Americans are probably the most offended by seeing anything that doesn't look American. Like, if they see British English, like, they're almost angry. Whereas other parts of the world have just become so Americanized. Like, we've kind of the halo effect of America, so to speak, has crossed into other borders more so than it has the other way around. And so I know some people might disagree with me on this one, but, like, even with that, in America, how many listings have you gone to and you're like, this was definitely not written by someone who's ever spoken English in their life? And yet it's still making good sales every day. And so if that's able to make sales in America, I think if you have a machine translated listing in other countries, as long as you're not missing out on major keywords that should be in the listing, you're generally okay. And so one of the best things to do is just look and see, like, if you machine translate a listing, look at some of your competitors. Are there glaringly obvious words that are in all the other titles that aren't in yours? And that's going to give you clues to, like, oh, okay, maybe I machine translate that word to see, like, oh, okay, I should have that in my listing just to see if it helps.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. David, any other last questions for Kevin before we hit the fire round?
Let's get into it.
All right, Kevin, are you ready?
Let's do it.
This is your second fire round.
Uh-oh.
What is your favorite book?
Favorite book. I think last time I was on, I had said, and I haven't read it in a while. It was, I'm trying to blank, Darren Hardy, The Compound Effect. I think I'm still going to say that one because I think that's something I've tried to live by for a long time.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
What are your hobbies?
Hobby. Gosh, I think I'm kind of a workaholic. So work is a hobby. So I'm maximizing e-commerce and the physical products business, and just coming up with ideas for new products on the physical product business is probably my hobby.
Okay. That's a good hobby. It helps out, right?
Yeah.
But what is one thing that you do not miss about working for the man?
Oh, great question. I'll give two. Being told when to be to work and office politics.
Excellent. Last one. What do you think sets apart successful e-commerce entrepreneurs from those who give up, fail, or never get started?
Oh, great question. I think a lot of it is just one of my favorite quotes. And sometimes when I hear it, I almost tear up. And that is the Teddy Roosevelt Man in the Arena quote, which I'm sure probably a lot of people are. Oh, there it is. Okay.
I literally have this right here. That's
Okay.
the
Yeah.
Man in
I
the
didn't
Arena
even
speech.
notice. Yes. This okay. For those who can't see this, you have a poster of the Man in the Arena. I didn't catch it. That's Teddy Roosevelt riding on a moose in a river. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt is a legend.
Yeah, that's
but
ballsy.
Yeah. We need more Teddy Roosevelts in the world. But he talked about, and you can switch man for woman. And I've heard women say this too.
Sure.
Is that, it talks about, the man in the arena whose, face is marred with dust and, from trying, but, is willing to, I'm paraphrasing here, but is willing to, accept potential for defeat in the pursuit of victory, and how some people live a life where they will never taste victory because they're too afraid of the potential defeat. He said it much better than I did, but it's kind of that just get in the arena. You learn so much more in the arena than you do from just trying to learn and get everything figured out ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect answer. David, you want to close out the show?
Yeah, you bet. Kevin, want to thank you so much for being a guest on the Firing the Man podcast. And to all the listeners that want to go international, just connect with Kevin. Kevin, what would be the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, make sure to tell me. Oh, yeah. Just you can email me, Kevin at maximizingecommerce.com, and just make sure to tell me that you heard me on the show, on the Firing the Man show.
Absolutely. All right, Kevin, thank you so much, and best of luck in Q4.
Thank you, too.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's Firing the Man podcast. If you like this episode, head on over to firingtheman.com and check out our resource library for exclusive Firing the Man discounts on popular e-commerce subscription services. That is firingtheman.com/resource. You can also find a comprehensive library of over 50 books that Ken and I have read in the last few years that have made a meaningful impact on our business. For that, head on over to www.firingtheman.com/library. Lastly, check us out on social media at Firing the Man and on YouTube at Firing the Man for exclusive content. This is David Schomer.
And Ken Wilson.
We're out. Before you go, we wanted to share a new service that Ken and I have been using called Getita that has made us over $10,000 in Amazon reimbursements. The service requires no monthly subscription, and Getita collects a small percentage of the money they recover for you. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up and works on all Amazon marketplaces. Go to Getita.com, Getida.com, and enter promo code FTM400. That's FTM for Firing the Man 400 to get your first $400 in reimbursements commission free. How much money does Amazon owe you?